Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining today. We're super excited to be doing this session. It is pre-recorded, but you can send us your questions anytime. We'll also have all the contact information. But we're really excited to have this discussion. And for those of you that don't know me, my name is Matt Tucker. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Koan. At Koan, we're building a modern leadership platform for companies, including a great way to collaboratively set and manage your OKRs or goals. And I'm joined today by one of our partners, Roger Longden from Derby Giants.
Hi, Matt. Thanks for having me on today. Really excited about doing this with you. I think the topic that we're looking at today is super important because the way that goals work in a lot of organizations is still fundamentally broken. So really excited to be talking about that today with you.
Exactly right. And that's the premise of today's discussion, which is the statistic that's been out there for a little while and sadly remains very true, that 95% of employees do not fully understand their company's goals or what's expected of them to achieve their company goals. And that's a daunting statistic. And both of us work with enough organizations to know that the struggles that folks go through trying to make their goals process or their OKRs process work. And so what we wanted to do today was really focus in on a set of 5 topics for where we most often see the goals process or OKRs process go sideways, the failure cases, so to speak, and the pragmatic advice that we've gathered over the years of working on this about how to do better, how to not be part of that 95%. So let's get into it. First topic we wanted to talk about, you have this phrase, Roger, that I love, the set and forget of goals. What does that mean? What happens when people set and forget?
Well, basically, it means that the only time goals ever get discussed are when they are agreed and when they are due to be completed. And as that picture beautifully illustrates, by doing that, all you're doing is just keeping your fingers crossed and hoping that in the lifetime of that goal, that it's on track. And what that means is that you're missing a huge trick if you only set and forget, because the power in a goal, if you use it, can be in helping to bring focus, helping to bring alignment, helping to bring motivation, helping to bind teams together under a common purpose for the lifetime of that goal. And setting and forgetting, which traditionally has been very, very commonplace, very, very much commonplace in organizations, is an absolute waste of a good goal, in my opinion.
Now, I should admit that, in fact, that's pretty much what I did my entire career previously. So I've been a part of executive teams where we'd get together for our quarterly offsite. We'd spend a whole bunch of time together going through the strategy and doing planning exercises. And we'd write down our goals and put them in the spreadsheet and then work them into the nice PowerPoint deck, present it at the all hands meeting a few days later, and then never talk about them again until the next quarter, going through the whole process yet again, and almost being surprised by the goals that we had set the previous quarter.
I know, and I bet saying that to yourself now, and you think, God, why did we not notice this at the time? But it was just the way things were done. It was just commonplace. And also, I think the pace of business, even just 5 or 6 years ago, wasn't as fast as it is now, and therefore, you might perhaps not there wasn't the pressure to be constantly focusing and keeping people aligned and making sure that distractions and distortions weren't creeping in, and so there was the temptation to perhaps be not as closely focused on them.
So let's talk about doing it better. You talk about this idea of designing the process around what an OKR's implementation looks like. When you're working with clients, what does that look like?
Yeah, well, you see, here's the thing, Matt. I think that goal management, whether it's OKRs or VTMOMs or whatever you choose to use, I think goal management is now being recognized as a discipline in its own right. And I'm super, super pleased to see that organizations are getting serious about how they manage their goals. But the thing is, there is no one single rule book or no one single model on how to do this. So in order to make sure that everyone is on the same page across the organization, you've got to do a piece of design work to start off with. And when we do this with clients, we call it the playbook. And it's about designing how, if you're going to use OKRs, for instance, you're going to use OKRs in your organization, because there are multiple ways of interpreting and applying OKRs. I've worked with some organizations that have asked us to come in because literally they're in paralysis because of the level of debate that they are engaged in, because one member of the execs read one book, another one's read another book, and they can't decide on, what cycle to use or what to focus key results on, and so on and so forth. And you just need to cut through that. And you need to iron out that to start off with. And another really, really important function, if you will, or benefit rather, actually, of doing the playbook is that it's your first step in your change management process. Because there's a lot of questions which, when people hear, for instance, the term objectives and key results, if they're not familiar with it, it can set a lot of hairs running. It can cause a lot of anxiety in people, because, especially in term objectives, because people have only really kind of come across that in relation to performance management. And time again, the first question we get asked is, how does this affect my pay? How does this affect my bonus? How does this affect my promotion prospects? And if you have the answers to those questions clear, and everyone is agreed on kind of the policy and what OKRs are going to be used for, and how they link in with these other key business processes and activities, then you can nip any early stage or early signs of resistance, hopefully, in the bud. So I think it's a really good, really positive, proactive step to take.
No, that makes a lot of sense, and we don't always use that playbook term, although I like that a lot. Might start using that ourselves. One of the things that we talk about with our customers is the importance of really being thoughtful about where you bring your goals or OKRs discussion into the regular cadence of your meetings. Whether that's your weekly staff meeting, where you make sure that you not only talk about what's happening tactically, but reserve a chunk of time to have the conversation about your goals and the bigger strategic picture. What other patterns have you seen work well in terms of incorporating goals into meetings? Because that's a lot of the cadence and playbook, so to speak, of how organizations and teams actually function.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really great question. And can I just say, you're making a really important distinction there by saying how teams integrate discussions on goals into existing meetings. Because, again, from a change management point of view, you've got a far better chance of success if you're trying to integrate into what already exists than just layer more on top of what's already there. And the type of cadence which we tend to find, I mean, it depends from on the drumbeat of the organization. I've seen some organizations that at team level, which is where the majority of OKR conversations typically take place, I've seen some organizations work on fortnightly. I've seen others work on weekly. I'll give you an example. I had a software company that I worked with about 12 months ago. They were based here in the UK, headquartered here in the UK, but had divisions all around the world, as far afield as the Philippines and Australia. And they already had a ritual that every single Wednesday morning at 8 a.m. UK time, all the senior management team, which was the level beneath the exec, they all got together online for an hour, and before OKRs came along, they just had a KPI meeting. So they did that every single week. And what they decided to do when we were designing their OKR structure was they actually decided to use this time which they were already in the habit of meeting at, and adapt that so that on week 1 they were discussing OKRs, and week 2 they were discussing KPIs. And what they found after a couple of quarterly cycles, they found that this was working really, really well for them, because they were using the OKRs to focus on the activities that were going to grow the business, and the KPIs were mainly focused on making sure there's enough fuel in the tank, making sure that there's enough oil in the engine to keep things running. So, that's
a great example.
Focus on your dashboard. Whereas the OKRs were more about, right, well, let's look out the windscreen and make sure that we've got the sat nav set correctly and we're on the right path. So, yeah, that was a really good balance, actually. So they've really soared to great heights with OKRs. They've done fantastically well.
Awesome. And then one final piece of pragmatic advice that I know we're both big fans of is this idea of imbuing a single person. You might call them the OKR champion or the coach, but a single person to own the process itself. And this is different than who's accountable to actually delivering on the objective and your key results. But single person to own the process, as well as, depending on the size of the organization, a set of coaches functionally to really make sure that once you've written down the playbook, once you've decided how you're going to incorporate goals into your meetings, who's actually going to make sure that that process is followed and done well, and best practices are maintained. And I like the analogy a little bit of the Scrum Master from Agile software development as a similar role, somebody that owns a process and makes sure that it's being done well.
Completely, 100% agree. I've met some other practitioners that say, no, it should be the manager's responsibility. Well, the manager has so much going on that my personal opinion is I don't think it's realistic to expect them to become an OKR expert. Yeah, sure, they need to know, they need to have a working knowledge of OKRs, but I've seen it work time and time again. If you embed a degree of expertise into an organization, and that starts with the playbook, because the coach then owns what comes, that playbook as a live document from there on, because, as you say, they own the process.
Exactly. So let's move on to the next topic and talk about the next challenge. We've been focusing on organizations that and this problem of we set the goals and then we have trouble actually incorporating them into our ongoing behaviors. But even before that is the planning cycle itself and some of the challenges around actually setting goals and what you can run into there. And so this next topic of goal cascading and doing it in this hierarchical top-down process, and some of the pain that trying to do the process that way, how that works. Instead, at Koan, we talk a lot about having both a simultaneous top-down and a bottom-up goal-setting process, where you end up with something that looks a little bit more like a network of goals rather than a hierarchy or a tree structure. What have you seen work well with your clients, Roger?
I'm a big fan of that as well, Matt, because I mean one of the absolutely fundamental principles of OKRs is that they should be used to empower, not constrain. And so what I have seen is with some organizations, when they've tried OKRs to start off with, they've really got this principle of cascade so sort of burned into their thinking that literally, the key result of one higher level OKR becomes the objective of the next OKR down, and you can see how they've literally bolted them together, and that becomes so difficult to work with. And I'm a big believer, though, that you do still need to set top level OKRs, because they provide the guidance, they provide the context, they provide the direction in which everything else, or the parameters in which everything else should then work. But I think as in terms of a balance of effort, I would say probably 30% top level, 70% bottom up. And I think the way that works is, you provide the organization or the teams or the functions with those top level OKRs, and then allow them to develop their own off the back of them. Okay. I mean, obviously there's got to be some negotiation and sign off, but you're not dictating what their OKRs should be. You're allowing them some freedom and empowering them. The message is, we trust you to go away and have a go at drafting your own. We're not going to tell you what to do.
And what do you have a metric of some sort around, down at a team level, if a team is inspired by the top level organization or company goals, as well as perhaps departmental objectives, what should that team end up with in terms of their own objectives and key results that are aligned to higher level objectives and key results, versus a set of objectives and key results that aren't aligned? Is there any kind of standard to note, hey, we're doing this right, or we're not aligned enough, or we're too aligned? Any practical advice you've seen work well?
So, oh God, is it possible for an OKR to be too aligned? I'm not sure. That's an interesting one. What I have seen is where you might find that an OKR ends up being not aligned. Now, I think there has to be the facility to allow for this, because, for instance, if you're an organisation that is keen to innovate, you've got to allow people the chance to go off and try new ideas, test out new thinking, and those whatever those little projects might be, they might not necessarily have a direct line of sight to the top level goals of the business for this particular period. However, I think it's important so that you're not so that resources and activity aren't firing off in all directions. I think when somebody is asking for some time and some resource to go and focus on something, I don't think that there's any harm in wrapping that up in an OKR, so that it stays within the review process, so that there's a regular cadence of discussion and check-in and some ability to track it. But it doesn't necessarily have to align. But I think there needs to be a degree of governance around that to make sure that somebody's not running a little cottage industry of their own, and it's never going to produce any benefit for the business.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
This idea of bottom-up goal setting, it sounds a little bit like chaos. What practically happens during the planning cycle when you're allowing this innovation and a bottom-up process? So a team comes and proposes their goals. What's next? How do you figure out cross dependencies and make some decisions about what gets resourced? What have you practically seen work well?
Well, really good question, and this is something which, if you don't tackle at the point of aligning the goals before they become live, then they will trip you up once they do become live. And we have a process that we take teams through, which helps to create if you will, a map, and it just maps across the key. The goals that they're working to, with the key processes or the key departments or the key value streams, and it helps to highlight where the pinch points will be, where you'll need to focus resource, otherwise you'll end up with bottlenecks. And we find that is a really valuable exercise, because it helps them to understand where the dependencies are, and that they can then start to anticipate those, plan for them in advance, rather than just say, yeah, hey, we're going to let this goal go live for this next quarter, and oh crikey, now we've realized actually there's quite a big dependency on another team and we hadn't realized that, and so on and so forth. So it's a very, very valuable exercise to kind of tease out those interdependencies and those resource requirements. Awesome.
And that's actually a natural jumping off point to our next topic, in the challenges of goal setting and making this whole process work well, which is to dig in a little bit more into the challenge of the planning cycle. And a number of interesting topics to talk about around OKR planning cycles, in particular, really understanding what the right frequency of goal setting is. There's almost a default of, hey, this is always a quarterly business process, but a lot of organizations and teams struggle with, should we be doing this yearly? Should it be every 6 months? Is quarterly not frequent enough? Is there any reason to be religious, Roger, around the planning cycle and making it quarterly?
No, there isn't in, like I said, OKRs don't have a rule book, and you don't have to stick to a quarterly cadence if indeed it's not right. In fact, in our recent annual OKR research report, where we looked at the use of OKRs across the world, we actually did find that quarterly tended to be the most popular cycle for team OKRs. 90% of the businesses that we surveyed used them at team OKRs, but then at the annual cycle, only 50% used quarterly, and the other 50% were very much leaning towards using an annual, a 12-month cycle for top-level OKRs. So it's interesting because what I always recommend is that you start off, and this is part of the playbook activity. You design how you're going to use them, and part of that is working out your cycles. But those cycles are not set in stone. And what we always encourage our clients to do is, and this is shamelessly borrowing from agile practice, is to do retrospectives at the end of each quarter and ask, look at the process. Was this the right cycle? Was this right for us? I got a client that did a retrospective at the end of their first 12 months, and they actually decided that they wanted to have a complete month of OKR downtime at the start of the next year, where they felt like they were giving themselves enough space to breathe, to plan, to work out what the next 12 months looks like, to design the OKRs, to make sure people were aligned. And so therefore they made their first quarter actually just 2 months. And that's fine. They're not breaking some rule or doing it wrong. What they're doing is they're adapting it for themselves. And I think so long as you don't lose sight of the fundamental principles of OKRs, then absolutely I'd encourage anyone to adapt it for themselves once they've learned the lessons.
Exactly. Now, one of the planning cycle challenges that I see very often is not having some rigor around when a planning cycle begins and ends. And so therefore, we're a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks into the next quarter, and we haven't gotten our goals or our OKRs locked down. And now we all feel like we're behind. Is there, and on the other hand, it's a really big challenge. How do we have a planning cycle before the last quarter ends and then the next one starts? You shared the example of a team that decided to give themselves some downtime. But what have you seen work well for other organizations?
Well, yeah, you're absolutely right, Matt. And calendars, months don't have a habit of finishing neatly on a Friday. They can finish in the middle of the week, and just kind of like everybody knowing where they're up to with a particular cycle is a big achievement in itself. And this is where I think the OKR coach or champion has a really important role to play, because they really should be the custodian of the central calendar. Okay, the central OKR calendar, so that and help people to understand where they are within that calendar. In terms of how people could approach the end of a period, what we see is one of the biggest risks to OKRs becoming derailed is in the switch over between periods. So for argument's sake, let's say you're using quarterly cycles. I've seen it with organizations that are new to OKRs. They're so fired up, they're so pumped up with focusing on getting their OKRs delivered by the end of their quarter, that they forget to actually prepare for the next quarter. So they get to the end of that first quarter, yay, we've got, oh, crumbs, we've not actually prepared for the next one. And they end up burning into that next quarter, preparing for the next one. Now, this is where it really pays dividends to be having regular check-ins on OKR activity, both in terms of not just progress, but also confidence around completing that objective or that key result by the end of the period. Because if you have progress and confidence data, you can bring that together after, say, at the end of, say, the second month of the current quarter, and use that data to help inform your predictions about where you might finish. And then based upon that, you can start to have a go at drafting what the next quarter's OKRs look like. So when you get to the end of the quarter, you've already got a set of draft OKRs. So you're already, you've already started work on the next quarter. So you need a lot less time to maybe either sign off or just slightly adapt and update those draft OKRs than you would do if you were starting from scratch. So I think this is where it really pays dividends, like I say, to have those check-ins happening and data being captured off the back of those check-ins, which allows you to do some advanced planning.
I love that advice, and obviously one of the perspectives that we have as an organization is this is a place where software can come in and really help with those types of disciplines and really make it easy for teams to follow that lightweight process.
Massively.
All right, so let's talk about a bit of a different topic. I think we could talk about the planning cycle and challenges for another whole hour. But a really frequent topic that comes up when we chat with customers, and I know you deal with this topic all the time, is how do we mix our goals with performance management? And we've been using MBOs, and we like the idea of having metrics associated with our objectives and stretching ourselves. But we've always had this culture of linking the goals to pay and to promotions. What do we do? When a client comes to you with some of those concerns, what sort of advice do you give them?
Well, it's really, this is perhaps the most sensitive aspect, I think, around OKRs. Interestingly, again, in going back to our recent research report, we were very keen to understand how many organizations were linking them to performance management. And actually, 30% of respondents said that they had attempted to link them to performance management, but actually only 10% had created a direct link to any sort of reward, pay, bonus calculation. Now, I think it rather depends on what you want to use OKRs for. If you're looking to use OKRs to drive innovation in particular, if you're looking to use them for helping to really drive growth, but drive growth through trying new things, finding new ideas, going in new directions, you can't always expect that to be successful 100% of the time. You want people to, come up with that crazy idea and okay, within some boundaries, give it a try. People are not going to feel confident enough, safe enough to do that if they know that if they fail, or if they miss, or if they don't achieve 100%, then their pay or bonus or promotion is at risk. People will just play it safe, and you'll end up with mediocre, average results. So, whilst I think I absolutely believe that no organization should pay for poor performance. I think where OKRs have a contribution to make to a performance evaluation is in looking at how an individual has worked with their OKRs. So have they, okay, yeah, to some degree that's what they've achieved, that looks at what they've achieved, but it also looks at what did they fail on and what did they do as a result of that failure? How did they adapt? It's what we call adaptive performance, which is widely regarded now as being the aspect of performance and individuals' performance that really sets them apart from their peers. People, tactical performance is the focus on the numbers or focus on targets, on budgets, and so on and so forth. But it's the adaptive performance. It's the ability to deal with ambiguity, the ability to be creative, the ability to be resilient. That's what is important, and I think that should be brought into the overall evaluation of somebody's performance. And I believe that. Yeah, and I believe that OKRs are a great source for kind of assessing that and getting a sense of somebody's, if they fail at something, how quickly have they bounced back? What have they learned? How have they applied that learning? That's all really, really fantastic, insightful information that can feed into the picture of somebody's performance.
Yeah, so if I'm hearing you the right way, this is similar advice that we give to our customers, which is this doesn't have to be a black and white issue. You can obviously and probably should have your OKRs as part of a performance management conversation. But if you link it too explicitly to a raise or a bonus, that's really where you can start to get into trouble. And it needs to be more of a nuanced conversation. And then one other thing that we often use as an analogy that helps organizations understand this is really the idea of your performance management process that is typically owned by HR or the people organization is really centered around individuals and their performance. And the purpose of putting in place OKRs is to solve some challenges around alignment and really to think about the performance of the organization as a whole, as well as departmentally and for teams. And if you can kind of separate those out and understand that the different purposes, this is a team and departmental behavior versus individual, we found that can help organizations start to unweave these things and write down the playbook about how do we move from our very traditional MBO goals process that really didn't drive alignment to something that is a bit more nuanced, not quite as black and white, but that actually has the opportunity to drive these bigger results in innovation, as you talked about.
Absolutely, and I think particularly in larger organizations, there has been a drive over the past sort of 6 or 7 years to really transform how performance management has been done. In fact, it was through researching new trends in performance management that brought me to OKRs 6 years ago. What we found is that some of the larger organizations that want to undergo this transformation have kind of latched on to OKRs as being a replacement for annual appraisals, for instance, because they hear that it's the right thing to have regular conversations, and well, OKRs require regular conversations, and hey, there are objectives, so why can't we? Well, crumbs. Yeah, that's it. I don't believe that OKRs are a direct substitute for MBOs, certainly when they've been used at individual level. Very quick little story, worked with a software company, another international organization, a couple of thousand people. HR had introduced the concept of OKRs, and they'd sold it to the business by saying that nobody will ever have to complete an annual appraisal ever again. Everybody stood up and cheered and thought that was fantastic. But the reality was 6 months later that they were actually having to go through, all the managers were having to go through quarterly alignment conversations. So they were all of a sudden feeling like they were having to have that annual conversation actually now 4 times a year. And this was causing a massive problem. And also they were forcing everyone in the business to have an OKR. And that's not necessarily realistic because for a couple of reasons. First of all, not everybody is in a position to influence or contribute towards growth, change, and innovation. And secondly, where our OKRs are concerned, less is more. Less is absolutely more. The more OKRs you have, the harder it becomes to understand what people should be focusing on. And if all of those 2,000 people have to have an OKR, then that becomes a huge alignment activity that they have to go through on a quarterly basis. So within 9 months, actually what had happened was that they redesigned the way that they were using OKRs, and the ownership of OKRs had actually moved across to the strategic planning office, and they became a lot leaner and a lot more focused in how they were using them.
It's a great example. And I think it's, we could probably have an entire session just talking about this performance management conversation, but we have two more topics, and that story I think actually is another natural segue into this next topic. We have two more left. This idea of the fail case for goals and OKRs being focusing too much on the how and not enough on the why. And what this really means is, often you end up in exactly the situation in the story you just described, where an organization can end up with not just one OKR for each person, but in some cases, 2, 3, 4, and many more goals than there are people at the organization. And despite the fact we all grew up knowing that too many priorities is the same thing as no priorities, somehow teams and departments and companies trap themselves into this far too often. What do you see as common behaviors around this fail case for OKRs, and what's some of the advice that you give to your clients in order to do it differently?
Well, one of the fundamental principles, I believe, of OKR should be to engender a sense of purpose in those that work with them. And that comes from answering the question why. So it's saying, for instance, that you want to having an objective of increasing revenue. Okay, that does what it says on the tin, but we have no idea what we're going to do with that revenue. Or will that revenue allow us to pay higher bonuses? Will it allow us to invest in more staff or new resources? Or what's it going to lead to? What's the plan? Yeah, and this is where, to be honest, the objective statement, the wording of the objective statement, is where you have the opportunity to illustrate that why. And I'm not talking about war and peace. It can be just adding a simple "so that" on the end of of what it is that you're planning to do, encourages you to just expand on why you want to do it. Simple as.
Exactly.
And yeah, and that goes a long way. That goes a long way.
I have a 3-year-old at home, and will often ask him to do something, and he'll ask me why, and I'll answer that question, and then I'll say, "But why?" And we can continue on this course for a while. It can be a little bit annoying, but that process in a goal setting context can actually be pretty helpful, and to just challenge yourself as a team again and again. All right, well, why are we trying to accomplish that? Is there some deeper thing that we can unlock by exploring this a little bit more? So that resonates a ton.
Yeah, absolutely. And all the data is telling us now that people are heavily motivated by a strong sense of purpose. If you give much sway to Dan Pink, who is one of the biggest influencers in the field of motivation these days, purpose, autonomy, and mastery. Those are the 3 most important levers which you can pull as a manager. And purpose is exactly where defining why is that purpose lever. It really is. So pull it, use it, make use of it.
Exactly right. And to that point, having a list of goals that is simply a set of tasks, that's probably the easiest way to destroy somebody's autonomy, I can imagine.
Correct. It is. Yeah, very much so. And that nicely links into how you should, how well a properly written key result can empower autonomy, because, and I'm sure you guys have seen this, one of the first things that you see in the key results in the early stages is they're written as tasks. And all they're doing is tracking activity. They're not tracking the outcome of that activity. Now, if you're just writing a list of activities that you're going to complete, that leaves no room for autonomy, no room for empowerment. So if you just state what the finish point should be and then allow people to work out how they get to it, so long as they get to it, then, and they do it, they do it legally and not causing any harm to anyone or anything along the way, then where's the problem? What the message in that is, I trust you, I employed you, I chose you because you've got skills, capability, and knowledge which I value. So I'm trusting you to use it.
I think you've hit on probably one of the biggest challenges for organizations that are embracing key results concept for the first time is it just feels natural to make a key result be the list of tasks, because that's how we approach a lot of goals in our personal lives. Hey, there's this thing that I want to do, and here's the list of things that I think I need to work on in order to achieve that. And obviously the objectives and key results framework proposes something quite different. Just as you said, instead of saying, here's what we're going to do, it's here's how we're going to measure whether we've achieved that outcome. And that's a pretty big challenge for teams to do for the first time. It does get easier though.
Yeah, it does. It's a discipline and it takes time. In fact, again, going back to our recent research paper, we found that it was around 9 months before they started to consistently see outcome-focused key results.
Interesting. And we can move on to the next point. We don't have to belabor this one too much. I hope it feels obvious, but I think if both of us would issue a challenge to all of you, it'd be just set less goals. And if you can do that, then it's going to at least kick off this process and not make it too heavyweight. And then you can go on the journey of setting better key results over time, but just don't make it too overwhelming. Start with less.
Well, one of the key disciplines of great strategy is deciding what not to do. And by setting your goals, you're keeping yourself to that. You're holding yourself to that.
So, final topic before we wrap up is, how do we know what goals to set in the first place? This idea of can we set goals without a clear purpose first? And I can't tell you the number of times we've walked into a customer, either during the evaluation process of our product or during implementation, where they're starting to go through the goals process and figuring out what goals they want to set, and they haven't even set a strategy or perhaps even written down the mission and vision of their company yet. And so I'm curious, when you go in to consult for an OKR implementation, I have to imagine that a lot of the work you end up doing is actually at the higher level first. What do you often see?
Oh, absolutely. If somebody presents me with a map but no route on it, then that map's just useless. And the route represents the direction they need to go in and the strategy they're going to follow to pursue it. And without that clear vision and strategy in place, then it becomes so difficult, well, actually impossible for people to create aligned OKRs. And where are they going to get that sense of purpose from? Because purpose comes from, or alignment drives purpose. So without that vision and strategy, we will not actually develop OKRs. I'm not saying that we have to help the client deliver that. If the client has already done the work, then we'll just help them translate that into OKRs. That's fine. But if it doesn't exist, then we will help the client create that, because it's fundamental, absolutely fundamental. And, I'm sorry to harp on about it, but going back to the research report, 85% of respondents said they wanted to use OKRs to improve alignment in the business. 85%, that's a huge amount. And, you have to have the vision and the strategy there clear, crystal clear, if they're going to achieve that and improve alignment.
Exactly, and perhaps one litmus test would be, if you start with that objective of increased revenue and you ask yourself why, and you can't answer the reason, that might be a good signal that perhaps you haven't had that deeper purpose and vision, mission, strategy conversation. And Roger, you've talked about the MUM test around goals. What is that? Okay,
so no disrespect to my mum. She's a very clever lady, but she doesn't exist in my world. There are many things that she could talk about that I wouldn't understand. But the thing is, the MUM test to me is, can I put my objective and my measures in front of her, and will she understand them? Because what I see time and time again is that exec teams who live and breathe the development of vision statements and strategies and plans and priorities just instinctively get it because they live and breathe it day by day. And this can often create a blind spot because they then fall into the trap of assuming that everybody else instinctively gets it like they do, and they don't, which is where the MUM test comes in. Is that crystal clear clarity? Is that super simple, easy to understand language used in how they've created their objectives, how they've defined their priorities? That to me is the MUM test.
That totally makes sense. And along with that, one of the pieces of pragmatic advice I like to give is, if there's an acronym that's part of your objective, can you not use that acronym? And it's possible that every single person in your organization will have the context that, as you said, the executive team does. But just as likely, the less easy to understand anything that you write down, if the purpose is to drive alignment, that's just going to sow confusion. So I love that advice. Well, I've loved this conversation. We've covered a lot of ground. We wanted to talk just briefly about some of the key takeaways and what we hope you bring into some of your own goal setting process, so that you won't be part of that 95% of companies that don't get this right. So recapping some of the highlights and things that I think, Roger, both you and I really believe in as effective parts of how to do this. First is to really think about this as a business process that is designed and ideally written out into that playbook. Second, to have someone that owns the process and is really making, holding the whole organization from a coaching and champion mentality around doing the process well and educating people around that playbook. To put it in the context of, what are we trying to achieve as an organization, to align it with your purpose and your values, so that you're actually unlocking the alignment and the drive that hopefully is the reason you're putting in place this goals process. Roger, what would you add to that list?
On that, just to echo that point, that last point that you made, have OKRs work in parallel with your values. I think OKRs are a fantastic way for organizations or for people to demonstrate an organization's values. And also as well, values are the building blocks of culture. And it was only just 10 days ago I was delivering a keynote at the OKR conference in Amsterdam on how culture is so important for OKR success. I've actually seen OKRs be stopped dead in their tracks because the culture didn't promote open and honest discussion. For instance, people didn't feel safe enough to have that conversation and say, you know what, I'm not 100% confident that we're going to hit this by the end of the quarter, because in the past they'd been given a kicking for saying anything like that might be interpreted as failure. And that's where culture can kill OKR stone dead. So this is where it's really important. The other couple of things that I would add are don't underestimate the change that OKRs represent. So make sure that you manage the change so that people, are well communicated with, people feel supported through the change, people are given a chance to kind of try it on and work it out for themselves, that they're not being dictated to. You're helping them design and incorporate how they'll OKRs into how they'll work. And absolute final point, now I always get asked, what's the one thing, if you're going to take anything away, what's the one thing that you'd focus on to make sure that OKRs are successful? And I'd say it's the regular conversations, it's the check-ins. Make them a thing of glory. Hold really, really good OKR routines and check-in practices up as examples of fantastic OKR practice, because this is how high performance is achieved. It doesn't happen by accident. It doesn't happen by chance. It happens through routines and rituals, plain and simple.
That's a great way to end. And of course, 2020 is coming up quite soon. Many of you are probably starting to go through your own yearly planning cycle. We, of course, would love to help you with that goals check-in process and better conversations and behaviors around goals with Koan as a great tool to approach this. You can try for free at koan.co/trial. And if you're ready to bring in some experts to help you design the business process and to do the playbook, of course, you can reach out to Roger and Derby Giants at derbygiants.com. And what kind of packages and services, what does it look like for a customer to work with you, Roger?
Yeah, sure. We've got a number of packages depending on where the client's at, whether they're new to OKRs or whether they've been using them. We can work with the client to make sure, obviously, they get the right solution. And we work all over the world. We're working over in the States in November. We look at also the development of culture if necessary to make sure that is right for OKRs. Sometimes we might do that before we actually start the OKR work. But we also have as well, if I could just put a quick plug in for the world's first OKR podcast series called Giant Talk, which is listened to globally. So you can actually, if you go to derbygiants.com, you can find the podcast on the website too.
Fantastic. And we'd love to take your questions. You can also reach out to us by email. I'm matt@koan.co. And Roger can be reached at roger@derbygiants.com.
Perfect.
We'd love to hear from you.